Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim D'Antona, CEO of the SLO Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our weekly webinar. As most of you probably know, we are into the second round of PPP and EIDL loan funding. And we are grateful to be joined once again by Judy Mahan, the Director of the Small Business Development Center. And we're also excited to have Don Golick, the District Director of the U.S. Small Business Administration for our region, and Corey Williams, the Public Information Officer at the U.S. Small Business Administration, to give us the latest on the stimulus loans and where we are at with round 2 of the PPP and EIDL loans. Additionally, we are excited to be joined by local business operators Greg and Miriam Holt from Big Sky Cafe and Chris Kington Barker of Hospice of SLO County to give us their experience in working through the process. As some of you may have seen, we worked with the press over the last couple of days to release some recent findings that came from our survey. Obviously, the biggest need identified in our survey for our community is the cash flow to keep businesses going. The federal government and SBA refunded the PPP and EIDL loan programs, and I know many of our businesses are hoping to find a lifeline in those funds. Additionally, we know the feds and SBA made some changes to the process that were intended to help get the money to small local businesses. We'll hear from the SBA on the latest updates and then hear from our local business owners. We will have time for questions after that. And so if you would like to add your questions to the Q&A section below, do not use the chat feature. That will send out information through that. When we get to that part of the program, we will pull questions from the Q&A area. I would also recommend that you look in the answered section of the questions if you are posing questions, as we do have Kristen from the SBDC here answering some of those questions in writing. So thank you so much, Kristen, for being here. So let me turn it over to Judy Mahan to introduce our guest from the SBA. Judy, are you here?
Hi, Jim. Hi, sorry about that.
I know we had a few difficulties there, so thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And we're so pleased to have Don join us today. Don's been incredibly busy is an understatement over the last couple of months. Incredibly helpful at answering questions. She's definitely our point person as the representative of the SBA here for our region, for all of the Central California region. Don, thank you so much for being here on board. Don has all the latest information about the EIDL and the PPP loan programs that are currently available for our local business owners. So I'm just gonna let you jump in, Don. I'm not going to spend too much time, but thank you so much for making the time to be here with us, Don. I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thank you, Judy, and thank you so much to the Chamber and the SBDC for everything that you're doing to partner with the SBA. I'm Don Golick. I'm the District Director for the Fresno SBA District Office, serving the 15 counties of the San Joaquin Valley and Central Coast. I'm glad to be here with you today. And certainly we recognize that this is a very, very challenging time for our small businesses. So I'm glad to have some time today to give you some updates and talk a little bit about the PPP program. I have a colleague here, Corey Williams from SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance, who can talk about the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and then we look forward to taking some questions. So as you all know, Monday marked the start of PPP round 2. And certainly for small businesses that were not able to perhaps get their applications in or get them funded under round 1, this is a really critical time right now for our region's small business community. So let me give you a couple of updates. I have been in touch with many of our lenders throughout the 15 county San Joaquin Valley and Central Coast District, and I'm glad to tell you that they are getting deals done. They are getting capital out to their business customers. So we're very pleased at the number of lenders who have stepped up between round 1 and round 2. We've added a number of new lenders that are currently doing PPP loans. And I know that they have really been working hard to get those deals in. One of the things I think is really important for all of you to know is that yesterday, SBA had a period of about 9 hours where only our small community banks with assets under $10 billion were able to, $1 billion were able to submit loans. So what that means is that for those community banks that are serving our truly very small businesses across the 15-county region, that was a dedicated period of quite a few hours where they were able to get those deals in for their customers. And in talking to our banks, I know that they were able to successfully do that. For businesses that are thinking about applying under PPP Round 2, a couple of suggestions. Number one, there's a wonderful new tool that is available on the Treasury webpage, which is www.treasury.gov, which in response to the questions that many of you asked under Round 1 of how do I calculate my payroll correctly, has been put together to help you do that. So this tool, which is a Q&A, very detailed, step-by-step, written in very straightforward, simple, easy to follow language, is a wonderful resource for businesses where you can figure out the type of business you have and then be able to use that tool to correctly calculate your payroll in order to ensure that you submit a PPP application that captures the information about your business that the bank will need in order to process your application. Additionally, as you know, the banks are going to be the ones that are determining loan forgiveness after the period of time that funds have been used. And SBA is finalizing the guidance, which will be given to banks that they need so that after their business customers have completed the 8-week PPP period and are ready to request loan forgiveness, the banks have all of the detailed information from SBA that they need to calculate those loan forgiveness applications and submit those to SBA. And once that's in the bank's hands, I know that it will be a useful tool for the banks to assist their small business customers who want to ensure that they can maximize the amount of loan forgiveness that they're going to receive under PPP. Another important update, just yesterday morning, SBA also released guidance for businesses that may be taking larger PPP loans. And it's important for you to know if you're getting a PPP loan that's $2 million or above, when your application for loan forgiveness is submitted by your lender, it will undergo an additional level of review by SBA. Again, trying to really ensure that businesses are using their PPP funds for those 4 allowable purposes, which are payroll, utilities, rent, and interest on mortgage. Certainly having the guidance on forgiveness is going to be really important, but it is also important to note that if you do have a portion of your loan which is not forgiven, you are given a 6-month deferment, up to 2 years at a 1% interest to pay and no prepayment penalties. So really the program is designed to give our small businesses access to capital now, a period of time for them to recover and stabilize. And then at that point, with the loan deferment, they would then begin to pay back any balance that they owe on their PPP. So I appreciate all of the businesses and our community partners that have sent in success stories of businesses that you know and are working with that have received their PPP loans. As much as it's good for me and the chambers and all of our many other community partners to talk about the successes, I think it's really more valuable for businesses to hear from their peers and other small business owners that they have been able to get a PPP loan. So I would say if you know a small business that has successfully gotten a PPP loan, we would love to hear that story. One of the things that I've learned from hearing from businesses that have gotten their PPP funding is businesses are getting loans as small as $3,000 under PPP. Certainly, we all are hearing about the much larger loans, but I do think it's important for business owners to understand that it is possible to get, for even just a very small payroll, a PPP loan of just several $1,000s. So I was grateful to a business earlier this week who reached out to me to say, hey, well, I got a PPP loan and it was only $3,000 because I had not until that heard of any that small. So another important point is that PPP can be used in partnership with an economic injury disaster loan. SBA recognizes that many businesses may have already applied for the economic injury disaster loan and are now considering applying for PPP, which is allowable and businesses can do. The economic injury disaster loan does provide businesses with capital that's available for a broader set of needs and purposes than PPP does. And those two programs can work in tandem. A business can have one or the other or both, with the limitation that they cannot cover their payroll for the same time period out of both programs. So I think I'll pause there. I know we had Corey who is going to try and hop on the call to provide an important update about the economic injury disaster loan. So if he's able to do that, I'll let him. And if not, I can certainly provide a few high-level updates on that.
Awesome. Well, it looks like I finally got into the Zoom, Don. So
Okay.
first off, I want to thank you all for allowing me to speak with the, be a part of the San Luis Obispo webinar. And, I'm glad to be able to provide information about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Now, just to give you kind of a more of a high level overview, because Don and I've done a number of webinars, most people are very familiar with the EIDL program. But just to let you know, so if your small business is in a declared disaster area and has suffered substantial economic injury, you may be eligible for an EIDL loan. Now, with Governor Newsom requesting the entire state of California, all counties within the state of California are eligible for the economic injury disaster loan. Now, substantial economic injury means the business is unable to meet its obligations and to pay its ordinary and necessary expenses. And economic injury disaster loans provide the necessary working capital to help the small businesses, small agricultural co-ops, and also our nonprofits until normal operations resume. Now, one of the things I wanted to touch on was some of the differences in regard to the EIDL program. So with the EIDL program, you can borrow up to $2 million for working capital, but also it is a fixed interest rate for businesses at 3.75%, and it's going to be amortized. All of our loans are amortized over a 30-year period, which makes it easier for repayment ability. For our nonprofits, the interest rate is fixed at 2.75%. And that's, again, amortized over a 30-year period, and all of our loans will carry a 1-year deferment. So it's important that, the business owner or nonprofit that actually was impacted, to use the capital how they see fit, and then not have to worry about making that first payment till May or June of 2021. Now, a couple things you probably have noticed is that on March 29th, we actually started a new portal which streamlined our application process. And all applications that those that applied after March 29th would have received an application number that started with a 3. Now, this is very important because if you wanted to get any kind of updates, and Don and I have been, awesome as far as trying to follow up and get any updates. If you have an application number that starts with a 3, please feel free to reference SLO webinar and your application number that starts with a 3. Now, if you applied prior to March 29th, you probably have an application number that starts with a 2. Now, that's a little bit different portal that we're using for those. And to get more up-to-date information, you would probably be best fit to call our customer service center, which is going to be 1-800-659-2955. But again, if there's an application number that starts with a 3, feel free to email me at Corey, Corey.Williams at SBA.gov. Again, that's Corey.Williams at SBA.gov. And please reference today's SLO webinar because I want to make sure to try to give you a timely update before the end of the day. But again, only if you have an application number that starts with a 3. If you have an application number that starts with a 2, please call our customer service number, which is going to be the 1-800-659-2955. With that, I think we're ready for questions.
Well, I want to thank both of you. I mean, I think that was great information. I appreciate, I know you, Corey, way to persevere and get into this. I know we had a little technology issues as we worked through those, but really appreciate both you and Dawn making time today. Dawn, I really, I hadn't heard, and I think it's really great information about the idea of having that that time available for small banks to apply. That's a really interesting piece. And again, as I kind of mentioned in the lead up to this, is the I think the SBA and the government have done a really good job of, you know, recognizing that they moved very fast to try and help everyone, but certainly there were things that happened that were unintended consequences. And in the second round has really tried to be focused about how, whether that was giving money out through the credit unions, and doing things to try and get folks to those small business. I want to just commend you all for the incredible work you're doing, and certainly understand that this is an incredibly difficult time for you, for our business owners, for everybody. And so appreciate you guys being here and talking to our businesses. And we'll get to questions in a moment. What I'd like to do, as you talked about, Dawn, was, you know, hear a little bit about from someone who's kind of been working through the process. One of our nonprofits in the area, Chris Kington Barker, is the executive director for Hospice of SLO County, and love to give her a few minutes to talk about her experience in the process, and also as a nonprofit, maybe what she's seen to help others. Chris.
Jim, you know, I'm glad to hear that the nonprofits were kind of taken in around on their own small businesses too, because that's great. We first started working on this as soon as we heard about it. And March 31st, when it was announced that the applications were available, that lenders were still being identified and added to the SBA website in preparation, like thousands of others. We had a loan application filled out, but there was still quite a bit of lack of clarity and emergent details about what kind of backup was required. When April 3rd rolled around and the SBA website was still implying that loan applications could be submitted to any approved lender, I think what happened was the lenders just got bombarded by calls. And even as more were being added to the SBA website, a lot of the lenders started determining that they would only lend to their own clients. And there was a real scramble to submit applications to the right lenders, including from us. We submitted our first application to the institution that we banked with, and received a call that they had so many applications that they had closed their first wave that they would be submitting. And if the funding didn't run out, they would probably be submitting more of the remaining applications that they had, which was obviously disconcerting. But I also received a list of backup documents. And at that point, I think in the first wave, as things were rolling out, it was bit by bit. And I think it was as frustrating to the lenders to try and figure their way through this as it was probably to SBA, and certainly to everybody that was looking to apply for a loan, us included. We received a list of backup documents that were required specific to the institution that they'd just gotten from their corporate office. And those had include detailed payroll reports. Fortunately for us, we have a bookkeeper that's outside our agency that does our payroll and taxes, because we don't want to just have one person looking at our finances. So because we do everything in QuickBooks, we were able to turn it around within 4 hours. But from a standpoint of a small employer, or from a small nonprofit, that's not always possible to be able to do that. So I think, you know, those kinds of things were really barriers as well. And then the next week we received notice that even though there may be another round of funds, we were far enough down on the list of applicants that this institution had received that we would not be able to go through and get any kind of funding. So I was encouraged to look for another lender. It just so happened, however, that this was the same time that we were sending out an urgent plea to donors and recipients of our email communications and newsletters to, if they wanted to support our agency, to please do so. And it was seen by a former member of our board whose lending institution had not been approved at the time of the first wave of the PPP loans, but was for the second. And she reached out to me to say that the lender wanted to support small nonprofits and make sure that they tried to get in. And it was an institution I had been talking with prior to that. So we were able to take the documents that we had to put them together again to get them in on the second wave of lending, and we got approved for the second time.
Oh, so that's great. I hadn't actually heard that. So do you have an like official approval now on this side?
Yeah, I do. Amazingly, I do. So yeah, I'm really thrilled about it. It's, for small nonprofits, a lot of us don't have the depth of a bench of being able to exist on months and months without having any kind of protection. So even for the ones that have the payroll protection that they've gotten for the 8 weeks, they're really on the precipice anyway. So, being able to get through this and what we're going to do from here, I think there are a lot of nonprofits in the community that are still going to be skating.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we know from the rules and regulations, especially on the nonprofit side, where again, a lot of it comes around galas and events that, you raise a big part of your money. Those are not going to be around for a while. And so I know this is a lifeline to maybe try and figure out those pieces, but that's fabulous to hear that good news because again, you do fabulous work for this community. And I think it's one of those things in that first round, as we were hearing, as banks were trying to process all of these, the biggest thing we heard was that the banks were just overwhelmed and some of the folks got left behind. And that's why we were so anxious to hear from you and how you had kind of gotten through that process. And I think it's helpful to hear that there were local folks, but potentially wouldn't have happened had you not had certain
I think it probably would not have happened for me at all. In fact, I know it wouldn't have had I not had a former board member, frankly, who was working with an institution that had a specific goal to work with small nonprofits. And I think the fact that we get lost in that, that it's a hard fact that happens, and I know it's happened to a number of us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's kind of, and so from that same part, I'd like to kind of thank you, Chris, for that. I would like to kind of pivot here to talk to Miriam and Greg Holt of what I will say is one of the Chamber's favorite restaurants, the Big Sky Cafe, to talk about maybe some of their successes and challenges as a small business, and certainly as a restaurant industry where you've faced a lot of challenges. And so, Miriam, Greg, welcome, and tell us a little bit about kind of your experience and what you've been dealing with.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a struggle to say the least, but just like from everybody else, we applied for the EIDL loan on the 31st of March, and because I had actually already done the application before that, but then it changed and it added on the advance option for the $10,000. So we applied on the 31st of March, and it was a lot of back and forth, like, you know, a lot of information. Judy actually was super helpful. She was always calling me back right away when I needed some help, so that was wonderful. We received the 10K advance about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, I believe, which was great. No, actually it was a week ago, which was great news. And that really helped us out because our business is down so much. We only have takeout and delivery, and it's just a very small part of our sales. So since then, though, we have not heard anything from the SBA about the loan portion of the EIDL, which is, Judy said to me that most people get an answer or an email that same day. Well, we haven't received anything. So I actually sent Corey an email a couple days ago, and he must be super busy, so he hasn't seen it yet, I think, but to ask for an update on our application. And then we also applied to the PPP. Basically got told there's no money the first time around, and we were bummed, but we also had a feeling that there was going to be a second bailout coming, which we just kind of held strong, and we applied through the Bank of the Sierra. And yesterday afternoon, actually, I got confirmation that the SBA approved our PPP loan. So we were very, very excited to hear that. So that's, yeah, we were, I mean, we're so grateful if that, hopefully that's going to happen. And then still waiting on the EIDL portion, the loan portion, because we need that as well. So hopefully, you know, hopefully everything will be okay, and we're going to be up and running again soon. And you know, have some people come in our restaurant.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear. Again, fabulous news. Again, we know that certainly on that piece, as you look at your restaurant, as you look at your business, you know, with the struggles that, you know, the challenges put before you on how the community can interact with you and be a part of your business. We know that that piece, in order to keep going and do some of these things, those PPP loans are a lifeline. And I wanted to see if you could just talk a little bit about applying. Certainly, I get why people apply for the PPP. That's forgivable, some of those pieces in there. Talk about your EIDL loan. I know folks have been hesitant potentially to burden their business with more debt, but how did you see it? Did you see it as an option that was necessary, and by taking on that loan, it would be the upside was better than the downside? Yeah, for sure. And also, right in the beginning, I can't remember because now it's been like 6 weeks or something like that, but I don't think they were talking about a PPP yet at that point. So for us, we were like, okay, what are we going to do? We need to be able to, I mean, we have a lot of employees that are working for us that, you know, their whole livelihood depends on us being open and, you know, being able to, for them to be able to have some hours. So we really were trying everything. And at this point, I mean, we've been without a good amount of sales now for 6 weeks. I mean, we're really not making any money whatsoever, obviously. I think it would be very helpful for us to have an additional, because, you know, we have payables that we would like to pay off, and you know, hopefully continue our businesses in a positive manner going forward.
And I have to say that when we're looking at the EIDL, it's a lifeline. This is what we do. I only know how to feed people. Now I own a restaurant, and I have to stay open. There is no, and that was the first lifeline. And when our community changes back to more of what it was before this, then we'll work out those details from there. That's how I thought about it. I'm the passionate and she's the thinker. Yeah.
He's the optimist, I'm the realist. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I think I think one of the things apparently we're seeing right here on this webinar is how potentially the second round is different than the first round.
Right.
Again, I think what we saw in our government, in the first one was a rush, and again, to try and get it out as fast as possible. It was the fastest. I've been in local government. I've been in government a lot of my life. I've never seen government move so fast and efficiently. Yeah. And so with that came some obvious hiccups, but it looks like as other lenders have come online, it's also opened up a little bit of the gate of who would submit your application or take your application. So I think it's great to hear that things can be going in hopefully in the right direction to give that lifeline, because again, we know that we're potentially coming up shortly, probably tomorrow, I don't know, around 3:15 p.m. we'll start to hear about a reopening plan on how that is. And so all of these monies I know are just those pieces to help you get to the next piece, which gets you to the next piece. So really appreciate you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to say our bank, our local bank, Bank of the Sierra, has been really, they've been super helpful and supportive since they didn't participate in the PPP the first time around. They just participated in the second time around, and they have been super supportive. So kudos to them as well, because those are the people we need, we rely on them. So anyway.
Yeah, no, and it's, again, we've seen that even whether, especially from those small banks who are able to give a lot more of that personal attention. And yeah, I know we had Mr. Bland here from the Bank of America, where they're processing 100,000 applications in like 24 hours, and it becomes very difficult. But yeah. So great to hear, and thank you for sharing that with us. And what we'll do is kind of now we'll kick it over to some of the questions and answers, and just try and get some of those questions from the community. And I'll throw it over to you when those questions come up. And I would ask Luis Quiroz if you could be more descriptive in your question of G on the application. I'm not sure which application. I'm not sure what question G is. So if you could be more specific to that, we probably can get a better answer on that.
Jim, while you're looking at
go ahead.
Questions, thank you. I just wanted to wrap up on the conversations we've had, give you a quick update on what we've seen in the county here as far as numbers are concerned. I wanted to provide some numbers supporting what Dawn was saying. We've seen about a little over 80 loans come through that have been reported to date. So we're seeking asking for clients to report back to us on a daily basis. So we're still gathering data. We know that there are numerous other loans out there that have not been reported back to us yet, but we've had 80 confirmed loans, that's 80. We've seen at least half a dozen loans under PPP in the $5,000 range or less. So again, to confirm some of the statements that were made, we have seen those happen. All the way up to about $800,000. We've seen a couple of large ones come through. And to date, as of right this minute, and we're tracking again on an hourly basis pretty much, we've seen about $9.5 million in loans here in SLO County that have come through. And we've just started gathering the data, and they're just starting to come in. So we're very thankful, and those are pretty good numbers, and we're expecting that it'll keep, we'll be seeing more in the next 10 days.
And I do know that as part of, thanks Judy for that, that's great information. It's good to hear that, and it's part of what I was talking about before. We were talking about a survey we sent out, because if you just listen to the press, you would assume that nobody got anything, and only Shake Shack and Ruth Chris or the LA Lakers were the only ones who got things. And it wasn't the case. When we put out our survey, we did see a substantial portion, 40%, who had either gotten an approval letter or money or partially funded. So we do know those things are happening, but it's great to actually hear kind of the volume and the level at which these things are happening. So what I'll do is ask this question for Dawn. Looking at, I think you mentioned early in the subject, in your talk there, that the PPP forgiveness terms are coming out. They haven't been released yet, or banks will be given those. Is that correct? And will they change? I mean, crystal ball type things, but we'd love to get your thoughts on how when those terms will be identified and how that process will work.
Sure. So a couple of things on forgiveness. So again, the loan forgiveness is determined initially by the lender. So one of the things that we have been encouraging businesses to do is, number one, make sure that you go in with the best possible calculation that you can of how much money you need. And so again, www.treasury.gov, there's some really helpful resources there to assist businesses in very step-by-step detail on making sure that at least their initial loan request is calculated as close as they can get it to what they actually need on their loan. Number two, after the period of time that the loan has been used, then the business will submit and prepare the documents that are requested by the lender for loan forgiveness. So what the lenders are waiting for right now, and again, what SBA is busily working on, is that final guidance that will be provided to the lenders to give them the detail that they need procedurally as far as how to determine that loan forgiveness, what kinds of documents need to be provided, how that process is going to work. And then the lenders will have 60 days following the period of time that the loan has been used, and the business has sent in that documentation to make a determination about loan forgiveness. Again, the higher level review that SBA is going to do on those $2 million and up loans. But yeah, loan forgiveness is, I think, the next big thing, because people certainly have those loans right now. They're already using them. They want to make sure that they're using them correctly and documenting everything that the bank is going to need to provide the maximum amount of loan forgiveness. And that's the part that is not completely clear yet, because the businesses can't really know exactly what they need, because the banks haven't been given that guidance from SBA. But we are getting a lot of questions in our office related to loan forgiveness. And what I'm telling the bank is, or excuse me, the businesses, is you need to have that conversation with the bank, because you want to make sure that you're on the same page with whatever information that your bank has right now as far as what they're going to do relative to loan forgiveness. That's a question that you need to ask the bank.
Excellent. Yeah, that's very helpful feedback to understand as we're in the chain, all of these decisions are made. So that's fabulous. I have a question that's interesting. PPP money, obviously supposed to be 75% used for payroll. Is that correct? Or it can be used for anything, but if you want it forgiven, you need to use it for payroll?
Yes, so that is a good question. A couple of things on that. When businesses apply, I think it's really important to note that one of the certifications that the businesses have to sign on the actual PPP application, I think it's the 4th or 5th certification, states that businesses are only going to use the funds for those 4 approved purposes. Again, payroll, rent, utilities, interest on mortgages. So I think, that provides some sense of the framework around which that forgiveness is probably going to be built. 75% of the loan should be used on your payroll. Using it on less than that does lower the amount of forgiveness that is available to you. I talked to a business Tuesday, I think, who said, well, I got my loan. I said, well, that's great. She said, well, it is, but I know that I got way more than what I need. What should I do? And I said, you should call your bank. I would make sure that you call your bank right away and figure out how to handle that. Certainly, there is no prepayment penalty on PPP loans. When it comes to forgiveness, if there's a balance that's due, there's no prepayment penalty. But I said, if you know now that you have money that you're not going to use, I would reach out to the bank and see what they want you to do with that. So there are some additional Q&As on that treasury.gov website. I would say that Q&A probably updates daily, sometimes a couple times a day. There is a little bit of expanded guidance on forgiveness, but until that full procedural notice on forgiveness for the banks is released, I think there's still a lot of things that are really unclear for both the banks and the businesses. But that is a top priority for SBA right now, to get that into the hands of banks and businesses so that they know what they need to be doing now as they're using those funds.
Yeah, and there's no, and with the PPP funds, it's not like it has to be used for payroll within April 1st to June 30th. And after that, it can be used for other. This is the intent of the program, at least at the moment, of course, is that is what it's used for however the length of that time that you have that money, correct?
Yeah, so there's a couple of timelines that I think are important for businesses to be aware of for PPP. So one of them is that the banks, once the loan has been approved, the banks have 10 days to disperse. There was an additional, I don't think it was a Q&A, I think it was some sort of an information notice that for businesses that are kind of trying to postpone that or push that 10 days out because they're not ready to use the funds, or they're trying to wait as long as possible until they're reopened. Please note that SBA has now told the banks, if your customer does not sign and return to you all the documents that you need in order to disperse these funds within 20 days, the banks can cancel the loans. So the banks have 10 days to disperse funds. And then once the funds have been given to once the loan has been approved, the business has 8 weeks to use that payroll. So I think it's important, to use the loan. So I think it's important for businesses to be thinking about now, if they have applied for PPP, what will you do with those funds when you receive them? Certainly many of our businesses are still closed, but that doesn't mean that your employees cannot be on payroll in some capacity. They can be on annual leave or vacation time or sick leave or family leave. They can be on administrative leave. There's a lot of flexibilities that are available to businesses in terms of how they administer those funds. But I do think it's important for businesses to have a game plan, if they've applied, of how they're going to quickly start to spend that money down and use it primarily on payroll when their loan is approved and when they get those funds.
Right. I know a lot of the loans and or funds are dedicated for those suffering economic injury right now. If you, for instance, I've seen it in a couple different questions in different businesses. Right now, if you were a small nonprofit, 501c3, and you were getting grant funding starting July 2020, or your fundraiser outside of, let's say, July or something, would be your main funding that is not going to happen. In order to apply and be eligible for these, is it specific to those injuries happening right now? Even though COVID may be creating the injury in the future, do you have to show those losses potentially right now to be eligible?
So again, for any kind of question related to payroll calculations, I can't speak highly enough about on the treasury.gov website, the how to calculate your payroll. It does provide really detailed information for a whole variety of different scenarios: sole proprietor, independent contractor, S corporations, C corporations. So there is a lot of detail on that, including what's in, what's out, how to calculate that, if there's tipped wages or draws or other things that are maybe not just a straight paycheck. That's all detailed in that. And I think that's a great resource for businesses.
Great. I know a lot of the loans and or funds are dedicated for those suffering economic injury right now. If you, for instance, I've seen it in a couple different questions in different businesses. Right now, if you were a small nonprofit, 501c3, and you were getting grant funding starting July 2020, or your fundraiser outside of, let's say, July or something, would be your main funding that is not going to happen. in order to apply and be eligible for these, is it specific to those injuries happening right now? Even though COVID may be creating the injury in the future, do you have to show those losses potentially right now to be eligible?
Yeah, so I would say the threshold, and it is clearly delineated in the application. Another one of the certifications that businesses have to sign, they have to certify that they're experiencing economic uncertainty. So, you know, that goes a couple different ways. I mean, those could be businesses that have had customers tell them, well, you know, we're going to struggle to pay you. We're not going to be able to pay you. I mean, we're seeing this in some of the, you know, law firms or accountants, things like that, professional services firms where they're still working, but they are very concerned that once that work is done, they're not going to be able to get paid by their customers, or their customers have told them that. So the threshold really is economic uncertainty, and that's one of the certifications that the businesses have to make. And again, you know, relative to the larger conversation about some of the larger companies that were receiving, you know, funds under PPP, businesses that are receiving those $2 million and up loans will undergo an additional level of scrutiny. But when you look at the application, really what the businesses are certifying to is economic uncertainty. And that looks a lot of different ways for different types of businesses.
Sure, that absolutely makes sense. So appreciate that. You mentioned interest on mortgage as one of those PPP to be used for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that interest or does that mortgage have to be on a commercial property? Or is it, if you're a home-based business, is that interest on the residential property a option? Is that part of what it can be used for?
Yeah, so I guess I would say one of the other questions we've got, which sort of relates, has to do with rent. So businesses have said, well, I'm a home-based business, I pay rent. Is it, you know, it really is, you know, rent paid out to an outside landlord. It's not rent that you're maybe it's not your own rent if you're a home-based business that you would otherwise be paying. So I can't really answer the question related to the interest, but I would imagine that that probably falls along the same lines. That might be something that would be further explained in the loan forgiveness guidance when that comes out.
Yeah, so in essence, as those discussions were happening, the theory was you'd be paying to someone else, or you'd be owning the rental building, or you'd be, so potentially that it would be an outside. And so there might be some issues whether if you were doing it to yourself, if the rent as a home business was to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
might be looked at as double dipping on some of that. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Seems to make sense. Talking about those 8 weeks of payroll, is it again specific to April and May for 8 weeks, or 8 weeks for when you get the money and start to use it in that 10 to 20 day period, right? Or and going forward, or is there something, are you going to lose weeks based on not having the money in April?
Yeah, so your period starts when you with the loan. So it, you know, it varies by when the loan is approved, and you know, that's when that sort of window opens as far as the loan forgiveness period. And I do think it's important, you know, for businesses to realize they may need to make some adjustments to their, you know, their payroll if they have a, you know, depending on when the employees are paid, does it fall in or does it fall out of that window? If the time was worked, but then paid later. Again, I think when that additional guidance is released on loan forgiveness, there might be some further explanation of that, but certainly recognizing that some businesses may need to make some, you know, adjustments on when they perhaps pay their employees, or slightly shifting some of that in order to maximize loan forgiveness.
Great. And so has there been any, and from obviously nothing official yet, but have there been discussions of what would potentially change the forgiveness and to, you know, a potential loss model or something like that? Or at the moment, has everything revolved around the idea of forgiveness solely being based around the payroll dollars applied for?
So, I mean, the forgiveness really is based on the use of funds during the, the 8-week window on those 4 eligible expenses, with the majority of it, 75%, being made on payroll. I mean, again, there could be some adjustments to that at some point, but at the moment, that's all the guidance that's been released. And Jim, if I could add a couple of things, I want to. A couple points I want to make. I know we're getting close to the end of time. I want to make sure that don't get lost. Certainly in many of the 15 counties here in the San Joaquin Valley and Central Coast, we have numerous ag business and farms and other kinds of related industries. And I think it's important to point out that there was some confusion perhaps under round 1 as to whether or not those are eligible businesses for PPP. And I want to make sure that it's clear that they in fact are. And so one of the Q&As that's been added to that increasingly longer and longer Q&A has to do with ag businesses. There is also a question on the how to calculate your payroll for farmers, what, to use their Schedule F and how to make those calculations. So I think it's very important for our farming, ranching, ag businesses to understand if they may have been told under round 1 that they weren't eligible, that is not true. They are in fact eligible for PPP, provided that they do meet the other eligibility criteria. The other thing I want to mention that we have gotten a lot of calls about in our office has to do with businesses that may have applied under round 1 and have not heard anything. So the most important thing is as much information as you can get from your lender. And certainly if you have one of the large national lenders, it may be very difficult to get sort of, individual communication or to get questions answered. But if there's any question about the status of your application, that definitely should go to your lender. And we've had businesses who have reached out to us because they applied with with one lender, didn't hear anything, applied to a smaller lender, and when their loan with that second lender was processed, it wouldn't go through because the first loan application had already gone. So it's important for businesses to know, I mean, if they want to, they certainly could apply multiple places, but ultimately whatever loan gets processed first, and it's hard to know which one that's going to be, there's only one PPP loan per business. And so it may not be with the preferred lender for the business. So that's sort of a risk that businesses take. If they've started with one lender and then kind of decide midstream to apply with the second one, they may not be able to guarantee that that initial one hasn't already gone through.
That was actually, it was great. That was kind of one of my close-up questions. So you hit right on the key point about between the 2 banks. Somebody's gone, and how do you figure it out which one has gone through? Sometimes only by getting a denial out of one. But one of that, just the final part of that question was also going to be, so if your bank says, okay, we've got all your documents and you've done everything for us and we're sending it in, that is not an approval, correct? SBA still has a threshold to do, and will SBA let the person know, or the bank will let them know you're approved through SBA now?
Yeah, so the process is that the businesses will apply with the bank, with their lender. The lender will prepare and submit electronically, and it's important to note the district offices like mine, we don't see any of those. So there's no review of those applications that we do. There's no processing of it by the district offices. It's basically an electronic conversation between the lender and SBA. The lender needs to get an SBA loan number for that, at which point the bank essentially has reserved the funds under the PPP program for the business. And so any information about approval is going to go from the lender to the business. It's not from SBA. And that is an important question. So if a business wants, if the bank says we're working on it, really the important question is, have you submitted it to SBA? And if so, have you gotten approval back from SBA?
Perfect. Yeah, that was, again, I know in small businesses trying to understand where it is. It's not like just applying to your bank, because there's a whole nother process beyond it. So look, let me thank you, Dawn and Corey, for taking all this time with us. We really do appreciate you sharing, and again, getting this information to us so that you know, it's a little bit more, it's a little clearer as to how things are moving and where we know and where we don't know. So what I would say is thank you for spending all the time with our community on this. I would also like to thank Judy for making the connect, making sure we got this to happen. And Judy, as always, we're so thankful for all the time you spend with our community. Again, Chris Kington Barker, congratulations, and thank you for being here. And Miriam and Greg Holt from Big Sky, thank you for sharing your stories. And I know a lot of folks, it'll be helpful for some of our folks who know you personally to come talk to you and get a little bit more, maybe personally, on some of what you saw, and maybe be able to help them and be that kind of conduit for assistance in our community. But again, we thank everybody for being here, and we'll be back next week, Thursday at 2 p.m. For more discussions as we start to get into the county potentially getting its reopening plan going, and how that will be changing our community. So thank you all for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great one.